In today's video, we're going to pack micro 4/3 camera equipment for a trip coming up to Perth in Western Australia. Let's get into it. Welcome back, folks. My name's Shane. I'm heading over to Perth at the start of 2025, and I thought what I'd do is share with you what I'm taking and why. And for this particular trip, like I promised recently, I'm taking exclusively micro 4/3 equipment, which I've done in the past. I took my GH6 on a prior trip a few years ago, and this performed great. This wasn't my primary camera on that particular shoot, but it was everything to do with B-roll, and it did a really great job. Then at the start of 2024, I purchased the G9 Mark II, and I took this to Perth, and this was my first outing with it a year ago from almost now, which is crazy. Time flies. I got this, I think, on the 2nd of January 2024, and I ended up trading in a GH5 Mark II that I had, and ended up getting this, and it's been such a great camera. And then the GH7 came out. So the GH7 is obviously the video flagship camera from Panasonic right now. The sad reality of YouTube, if you watch almost any channel, is they're always dismissing micro 4/3 based on its smaller sensor, but this sensor in this camera is really something else. Sure, you're not going to get the same sort of shallow depth of field with the same aperture setting, but you can still get extremely good results out of this camera, and it's been an absolute pleasure to use. It kind of made me reassess whether or not I made the right move going to full frame in the studio, because I was exclusively a micro 4/3 shooter quite some time ago. But they've all got their place, and while this camera body is definitely not small, it gives you everything you could possibly want. Now, recently I was over in Hawaii and I took full frame cameras, the S5 Mark IIX and the S9, and the end result was awesome, especially in low light scenarios. But there were a few times where I actually missed micro 4/3. The biggest reason why I missed micro 4/3 is it doesn't change your field of view when you change mode. So I could shoot 4K 30, 60, or 120p, and I'm not going to get a different field of view. And this is something that I really did miss shooting with the S9 and S5 Mark IIX. Now, I can, of course, make 4K 60 with an APS-C crop work. It's not the end of the world for me, but 4K at 120 frames per second really is something beautiful, and this camera does a really great job. So the first one coming with me is the GH7. The second camera coming with me is, of course, the one I purchased right before my last trip over to Perth, the G9 Mark II, and this is an absolute beast of a camera. It gives you pretty much the same modes found in the GH7, but with a lighter body. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of people think that this camera body is either too big or too heavy. Now, if you're coming from one of those like GX85 style cameras, this might feel a little bit different, but the ergonomics on this are fantastic. It's got a nice big grip, the same grip you find on the S5 Mark II, but it's actually lighter because there's no active cooling. And as a photography video hybrid camera, this is all you really need. Last time I was in Perth, I managed to shoot all of my A-roll on this without it overheating. I only saw the overheating warning message once. It has since overheated since that initial video, but it's such a great camera for shooting both video and photography. And the sensor, being that it's basically, I think, identical to that of the GH7, means we've got a really great A and B camera combination. Unlike previous trips where I went to Perth and I shot a lot of guitar-centric content, I'm not going to be doing that this trip. I'm not visiting any of the guitar shops or putting together anything like that. But what I will be doing is shooting content out in the field for both channels. So I wanted one camera that I didn't have to worry about overheating, and I wanted a second camera that's better for vlogging based on its size and weight, and also has the S&Q mode up here. The benefit of the G9 Mark II with the S&Q mode is it allows you to slow down the footage in camera without audio. So I can shoot, say, on a 25p timeline and select 120 frames per second. It's all slowed down in camera, and you also still get phase hybrid autofocus. Whereas if I'm shooting in variable frame rate mode on the GH7, and this is where it's slowed down in camera, I'm back to manual focus on the same 4K at 120 frames per second. So the clear advantage here goes to the G9 Mark II. Now, just to clarify, there seems to be some confusion over variable frame rate mode and standard recording mode. So if I'm shooting at 4K at 120 frames from the regular recording menu with sound that I then need to slow down in post, this camera has phase hybrid autofocus in that mode, but in the mode where it's slowed down in camera, the GH7 defaults back to manual focus. Now, there's supposed to be some technical benefit to shooting in variable frame rate mode over S and Q mode, but to my eyeball test, I can't work out what that is. So let us know in the comment section if you know the benefit of it. All right, now let's talk about lenses, because this is where it gets confusing for Micro Four Thirds. Do you take a lens that's got a premium look and premium image quality, all that kind of stuff, or do you take something smaller that's arguably more functional at the expense of not being quite as fast? And this is where I always have a dilemma when it comes to Micro Four Thirds. So this is the 10 to 25mm f1.7 zoom lens. It's arguably one of the premium or most beloved lenses for video shooters when it comes to shooting Micro Four Thirds. We get the equivalent of a 20 to 50mm lens. And while this is large, it's not as heavy as it looks, but it is, of course, a lot heavier than the 12 to 35mm, which is basically a 24 to 70. Now, there's a few things I think about anytime I want to take stuff like this with me. Is this too big to travel with? And will I be paranoid about having it in my camera bag? And for this particular trip, I won't be paranoid about it whatsoever. So I'm going to be taking this with me, and I think this will be a good opportunity to test this a little bit more out in the field and maybe do a full-blown review of this. So stay tuned for that. Now, this 12 to 35mm lens is arguably my favorite zoom for Micro Four Thirds based on its size. We get optical image stabilization, but it's not quite as wide as the 10 to 25. It's that 24mm equivalent. So if we're using, say, the E-stabilization on any of the newer cameras, then it's going to crop in even more, which means if I want to vlog, I'd get better results out of a wider lens. Which brings me to this. This is my favorite Micro Four Thirds lens, the 9mm f1.7 prime. And as in terms of wide angle, the look of this is spectacular, and it's wider also than the 10 to 25. So if I'm doing any fun travel stuff or vlogging and I want to use E-stabilization, it's going to crop in, but it's still going to be plenty wide for anything that I shoot. And again, look at the size of this thing. It's one of the huge benefits of Micro Four Thirds once we start talking about some of these native prime lenses. The next prime on the list is this Plastic Fantastic 25mm f1.7 prime. This is the cheapest 25mm lens on the market, I'm pretty sure, or at least from Panasonic. Anyway, this is super cheap. I've had 4 of these over the years. When I was exclusively shooting with Micro Four Thirds, I had 3 of them at a time. I sold 2 and I bought another one. So I now have 2 left, and they're just great little lenses. And again, the compact size makes these an absolute no-brainer. But I've got 25mm on this. But yeah, again, weigh it up when it comes to size and weight. If you're already subscribed to the channel, you might remember I purchased the Sigma 16mm f1.4 prime a little while ago, and I've been using this in the studio so much with the GH7 in a primary fashion, much like I'm using the S5 Mark IIX right now. And the look is very similar to this, with about a 10% or so difference in the background blur. So you can get a really premium look out of this. I haven't done a full review of this lens either. I'd love to test this out with some low light footage coming up. And I'm sort of on the fence whether or not I bring it to Perth based on the fact it's as big as it is. And again, while this has the speed advantage of f1.4 versus f1.7, it's covering the same sort of territory, which means I probably won't be taking this with me, but maybe. We'll see how much all of this weighs coming right up. Now let's talk about filters and what I'm taking and why. So one of the filters I took to Hawaii, which a lot of people commented on the video saying, how does this look so good? I was using a circular polarizing filter. Now, this acts kind of like an ND. It drops the exposure about 1 full stop. So if you're shooting in a bright scenario, this will also sort of dampen the light, which is great. The biggest advantage to a polarizing filter is it will help you cut the glare on water or through, say, the windshield of a car, but it also allows you to get the most out of a blue sky. And I think this might have been the secret ingredient to a lot of that footage. It was amazing how many people commented on the footage from the S9 especially. And all I did was pop this filter on, and mostly just on the kit lens, and the end result looks great. So yeah, polarizing filters, I can highly recommend it. This is just a cheap K&F one. I'm not sponsored by them at all. I purchased all these filters, including this one. Now let's talk about variable ND filters. I'm not actually shooting with these anymore. I find them more trouble than they're worth, and it can create a weird sort of color cast if you don't have them set correctly, or if you have them set too intensely. Just doesn't give you a very good look. So I've moved everything over now to fixed NDs. These were on sale for Black Friday recently. So I got 2 K&F Concept Nano X series filters, a 67mm one over here and a 77mm one over here. Now I've already shot a whole bunch of footage using this 67mm one, and even on wide angle lenses, there's none of that sort of vignetting or color cast that was apparent on the variable ND. So I much prefer the image quality out of these. And while this is a 3-stop filter, so it brings the light down 3 stops, it actually allows me to run the cameras in aperture priority mode and slow down the shutter speed. Not quite back to 180 degrees, but enough where it looks much, much better. So yeah, I can highly recommend these, and I'll show you some examples I've already shot with this on my S9. I think the end result really looks great. So the last thing I'll be taking with me, other than a few power accessories and so forth, is my MacBook M1 Air. MacBook Air M1. So I've had this now since, I don't know, my trip overseas a few years ago. And it's been so good. And it does a lot of the basic editing that I throw at it without any problem. So that's great. Now we're going to weigh everything and see whether or not we fall under the weight limit. So let's do it. This bag is maybe the cheapest camera bag I've got, but it's small, it's a backpack, and it fits my computer, which is crazy. So as long as this falls under 7 kilograms, we're good to go. Piece of cake. Piece of cake. 4.5 kilograms. Which means I could bring all of the lenses with me. I might have to pack the Sigma. I really didn't think I'd be under 7 kilograms, or it would just be shy of 7 kilograms. But I think now I'm going to be taking this Sigma. Whether I use it or not, it doesn't really matter. At least now I'll have the option to do it. And if I get a chance to shoot a video about this while I'm away, I will, because it's such a great lens. So yeah, stay tuned. There's going to be more content coming up, all shot with Micro Four Thirds. Don't tell the YouTubers.